Hey there, everybody. I am Jeff. This is Tabletop Toolbox, and thanks for joining me here on episode number 76 of the Weekly Ratchet. What a heck of a week it has been. I was bitten by a rat, zapped by a laser, and just could not invent that X-ray machine. I'll tell you all about it right here on the Weekly Ratchet. Hello there, everyone, and welcome back to the regularly scheduled programming of the Weekly Ratchet. Thank you, all of you who tuned in to episodes 75 and 75 and a half, where I recapped the Dice Tower Retreat and the 30-something games that I played while I was there. This is the usual point after the retreat, where all of the games that I really liked have started to come in because I bought them. And I did also kind of take the past week. I mean, I obviously filmed those episodes, and I played a couple games with my family and some friends, which I hope you've gotten to do as well, of course. But I didn't do any other filming work. I haven't done any scripts. I need to kind of get back into the swing of things here. Just kind of took that past week to catch up with work and just other little stuff along the way. But let me go ahead and tell you about some of the games I've acquired. All right, up first is Rats of Wistar. I mentioned playing this at the retreat, had a lot of fun with it. I did not remember this is actually from Capstone Games. And so this one came in. It's got all the little promos and little miniature expansions that came with it, so I'm pretty excited about that. We actually played this already over the weekend, and I will say that its stock dropped just a little bit for me because I kind of saw the same thing happen that happened at the retreat. I'll tell you about that here in a little bit. Stick around for that. Up next, this was a prototype that came in just after I recorded episode 75. This is Dicey Devices. Now, I mentioned this in the episode coming out of Gen Con. I did sit through a quick demo there. This has this really neat art. It kind of reminds me of the game. There was a video game called Speedrunners. It just reminds me of that sort of illustration style. There's probably a name for it. I don't know what it is. But in this game, you're sort of mad scientists, and you're trying to zap each other with a death ray. Pretty interesting. We also played this over the weekend, so I'll tell you about that as well. The last game that came in, this was a Kickstarter that I've been waiting for, and I've mentioned it before. Luthier has finally arrived. This is from Dave Beck and Abe Burson, published by Paverson Games, the same company that made Distilled. Now, I always kind of thought Distilled missed its theme a little bit. This game misses its theme in some other unique ways. It's in fact, it has so much theme in it that it almost seems a little out of place in some areas. But I talked about playing this at the retreat, and I was really kind of torn as to whether or not I was going to open this copy because I just don't know how often it's going to get played. I did go ahead and open it. I think, despite the fact that a few things theme-wise don't really make sense in the game, I still really like it. I like the way that it plays. It's worker placement, which is one of my more favorite mechanisms of play. And of course, as a musician myself, this really just hits too close to home to let it go. So I did go ahead and open it. Looking forward to hopefully getting to play it. This is the only one of the three that I have not played yet. I don't have any immediate plans to play it, but I'm sure we'll get to it here at some point, hopefully before I forget how to play it. And on that note, probably a good time to check out your answers to Question of the Week. All right, last week I asked you, have you ever learned a game only to have never gotten to play it? And I was not surprised to see a lot of positive responses to this one. Let's go ahead and get into it. Up first was Omar Hernandez, who said he learned Tea Garden at the Dice Tower Retreat, but then had to give up his seat as he was scheduled to be joining another game. I mentioned in the comments that we actually played Tea Garden that last week. That I think that got mentioned in the second episode there in that recap. And I'll tell you, I know what that's like, but that's also one of the reasons why I just don't like scheduling games to play at these types of events. Even the local RiverCon, there's a way that you can actually create an event. Okay, we're going to play this game at this time. And it's like, well, yeah, but if I'm in the middle of something because it's maybe running long, then all of a sudden I got to walk away. So if I do that, I do try to play them first thing in the morning. So, okay, I'm going to get there, going to play that game, and then just do whatever else kind of comes up throughout the rest of the day. But I can certainly appreciate that challenge at something like the retreat, where there's so many people playing and so many different people want to try and get games played that they try to schedule things to give them a better odds of success. Teshera said he picked up a used copy of Mr. President earlier this year and took his time getting through the rules, as there is quite a lot of them. Unfortunately, he hasn't actually gotten to play it yet. Yeah, I've done this too, right? You get some game, okay, there's a lot of rules here. I'm going to start working through it. I'm going to start figuring it out. And then it just, it kind of gets buried. It never gets played. Maybe new stuff shows up, probably more of a problem for me. But, and then all of a sudden you're going, gosh, we still haven't even played that thing yet. So I feel you there. Simulation Chris said this has happened a few times, so much so that he's had to start ensuring a game would get played before starting to learn the rules, adding, looking at you, Underwater Cities. Yeah, I was talking about that, I think, last episode, in that, you schedule a game group. Even I had one where I scheduled a game session for Civolution, and then I had that dental work, and I had to cancel. And then, a couple weeks later, we got it rescheduled, and I had to go back and look at the rules again. And that's too bad, man. Underwater Cities is a great game. I hope you get a chance to play that at some point. Weston said he's learned several games he's never played, as he has often learned how to play games in order to demo them at local conventions. He likened it to a coach who's never played the game he coaches. I thought that was really interesting. I never even considered that aspect of it. And I know what you mean. I go to these cons like Dicey Devices. I sit through that little demo, and you have to wonder, have they even played the game? Maybe they haven't had a chance to play the game. And I even have to wonder, after you come back from something like that, do you even want to play the game? You've probably talked about it and seen it so much that you're sick and tired of it, I could imagine. But it kind of makes me curious. Penny said that she spent a lot of time learning to play Oathsworn before her and her husband decided to paint the miniatures. Those still aren't ready yet, and by now, she's completely forgotten how to play. That makes sense. I can think of maybe one time or so where I've kind of had the same problem of maybe not necessarily learning how to play, but maybe I had a plan to replay something, but I was waiting to get a insert made or get some upgrade purchased or something. And then, it just kind of sits, and all of a sudden you realize that box is sitting in pieces over here in the corner of the room because I've been putting off doing something, right? And so you just never get back to it. Hopefully you guys get to play that soon. C.R. Pohl said he's experienced this way too many times to count, often due to the rules being very complicated or the rulebook being very difficult to follow. And I kind of get that. Usually I'll get through it. I mean, that almost kind of sounds like you didn't actually even get to fully learn the rules because of issues with the game. And I almost had that problem with Dicey Devices for just this reason, as I'll get to explain here in just a moment. I mentioned that this has happened to me a lot of times. I'm a little bit of a late owl. I like to stay up later, but of course I can't get up later. So sometimes when it's time to go to bed, I'm just not tired. Maybe I don't feel like I've been productive enough during the day, and I'll often take a rule book to bed, especially if it's something new that just came in, a prototype, a new Kickstarter, whatever. And I will sit there and sit there and lay in bed and read the book. Often fall asleep, realize the next day I have no idea how to play the game. And so, or sometimes I will get through the rulebook. Okay, yeah, it makes sense. I roll over and I go to bed. And then, just completely forget about it. We never get around to playing it. I've even had times where I've taken the game to a convention or, a local event or a game night or something and realize, the rulebook's still sitting in my bedroom on my nightstand. Oops, someone pulled it up on your phone. That happens quite a bit. But speaking of Dicey Devices, let me go ahead and tell you about some recent playthroughs. Boy, I am blitzing through the ratchets today, aren't I? All right, a couple of recently played games. Of course, I got back from the retreat on Monday, and I needed to just kind of go out to one of my favorite watering holes and kind of relax a little bit from the rest of that drive. And so we went out to our Center of the Universe Brewing Company, brought along our copy of CuBirds. This is a very simple card drafting game where you're trying to collect flocks of birds. It's been one of my daughter's favorite games. We haven't played it here in a little while. I don't even know if I've mentioned it in the retreat before or in the Ratchet before. I think I have. But anyways, you're collecting these birds, these sort of Minecraftian looking bird cards. You're going to need a certain number of those cards in order to play one of them in front of you as a flock. And the goal is to simply get either 3 flocks of 2 different birds or 1 flock of, I believe, 7 different birds. And this one's a fairly simple game to play, but there is one mechanism in this that really throws me off. And that is that if at any point a player ends up with no cards in their hand, which there are a couple ways to kind of make that happen, but if you end up with no cards in your hand whatsoever, you basically force everyone else at the table to discard their entire hand, and then all of you redraw to 8 cards, and that player who ran out gets to go again. And I tell you, it's one of those games where, okay, yeah, I'm working on this tableau of, trying to get these sets of birds out. Maybe I've got just one shy. I'm waiting to try and grab it. And then someone suddenly forces me to discard my entire hand and start over again. And that can be maddeningly frustrating. My wife won this one. I don't think she's ever won a game of CuBirds. It's either always been my daughter or I. And so she was really happy to win this one. CuBirds. Up next, I mentioned that we were going to try and get this played this week. Another big, heavy box on the table. Daniel showed up and we played Inventions by Vital Lacerda. This is understandably a very, 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 very heavy game, very complicated game. And the basic idea behind this is you're just trying to invent things. You're trying to invent new ideas of course, existing things in the world. None of this stuff is made up, but you're going to need to have sort of prereqs. So, for example, you needed to have paper. You need to have invented paper in order to invent board games. There's a board games promo card in here. And you start off with a couple of those prereqs already established. There's this idea that you might sort of claim one of these prereqs to yourself. You just have access to it. But then after they've sat around for so long, they kind of become common knowledge and everyone sort of gets access to them. And then there's this whole idea that, okay, there's, the globe is represented on the map. And as you're inventing things in different countries, you sort of push your workers into these different areas. They're setting up possible sort of bonuses or things that you can do. Eventually, you might be pulling those guys back to trigger extra actions. All of this happens with this eye towards combos and chain reactions of things that are happening. And so, for example, on your turn, it's kind of a worker placement. You've got these 10 actions. You're going to put out these little pawns, and you're going to trigger an action. You're only going to trigger 3 actions on each round. I think you get all of maybe 15 turns in the entire game. And so you could put a pawn out and say, okay, I'm going to invent something. Inventing means you're literally flipping over a card from its idea side to its invention side, and you may have to spend a worker to do that. You're going to get a very small bonus, but that basically becomes your card now. At some point it gets shared with the world, and when that happens, that card comes to you and kind of gives you some extra benefits that you can trigger throughout the game. But you could just go there and do that action and flip that card over. That was my turn. But that is probably the worst way that you could play this game because as you start looking around the board, you may have these cards in front of you, these inventions that you have already invented and then shared with the world, and they have bonus actions on the bottom of those. There are little tokens out on the board on these different regions, these different countries that have actions that can be triggered. You've got these little speech bubble tokens that get played out throughout the game. They have actions on them. The prerequisite technology is already mentioned. They have actions on them, and they're all the same actions. Those 10 actions that I mentioned are the same 10 actions spread all over this board, all over these different icons, various different ways you can accomplish these things. So what you might find is that, okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and place my worker pawn here. That's going to let me reclaim a worker from this technology, which triggers that technology, which is another action. I'm going to use that action to move a guy across the map. That's going to set me up for a scoring combo later on, but then I get to trigger an action there. That says that I get to do something else, maybe triggering one of the abilities on one of the cards I've already invented. That's going to trigger something out on the main board and let me flip over that card that was the only thing I actually really wanted to do on my entire turn. And so you've worked your way into this through this convoluted series of actions to be able to get that one thing done. And the more that you can do that, the more that you can stack up these chains, obviously the more successful you're going to be in this game. I mentioned when this came in, I played it at the retreat last year, so it's been just over a year since I played this. And there's a how to play video out there from Gaming Rules. He was the the official sort of teach video from Eagle Griffin Games. And I said, hey, I've played this. I remember it. Shouldn't really be that hard to get into. I'll go ahead and watch that video again one more time, just kind of be safe. And I'm watching that video and I was like, this doesn't even look familiar. I don't even recognize some of these systems, the rules and how things can move and what can and can't be done and where costs have to get spent. It didn't even look familiar to me. And so I ended up watching that video twice. I still wasn't quite confident going into our playthrough. Luckily, Daniel had been playing it solo a couple of times since we got these copies just a few weeks ago. And so he had a little bit of a leg up in how to play it. and also how to play it well. It wasn't a blowout in the score, but he did win this one quite fair and square. And the problem with this is I say that, but we are sure that we goofed a lot of little rules because a lot of these actions, they may result in flipping a card, but there's other things that you get to do before that are mentioned in the action sequences of each of those 10 actions, and it's very, very easy to forget one. And it might just be something like, okay, we'll draw one of these tiles and add it into your sort of player board, which is giving you various benefits and things that you can kick off. Or, move one of these tokens over to here. And if you just forget to do that, it's not really going to break the game. If anything, it's going to sort of set you back and make it a little harder for you to, succeed in the game. But we are sure that we goofed up a lot of little stuff. And it's also one of those games that because of those complicated chain reactions, if you suddenly realize, oh, wait, I wasn't actually supposed to be able to do that because maybe I put my pawn in the wrong spot or something, you can't walk it all back. You did so many things on that turn that even just remembering how to undo it all is almost impossible. And so, I don't know, I like the process of the game. I like the challenge of the game. I want to say the word puzzle, but it's not a puzzle. It's almost like a 3-mile long military boot camp style obstacle course. That's what it feels like. But the theme, it just doesn't exist. This idea that I'm using technology to make inventions is great. You hardly almost never pay any attention to the words on the card. I mentioned in the intro that I couldn't invent that X-ray because pharmaceuticals hadn't been researched yet. Daniel had sort of control of no, he didn't actually. It was the neutral player that you had to use in a 2-player game. Sort of had pharmaceuticals, and I had not been able to go and put one of my workers on that technology to then say that I have access to it. And so I could not invent that card, which means I couldn't share it with the world. And that cost me 10 points at the end of the game. That would have actually possibly tied up the score. But you don't feel that challenge of, oh, I need to get this invention so I can invent this thing and that's going to share it with the world. It's all just the words. It's I need to put a token there so that I can flip this card, so I can put this token here, so I can put that card here, and I'm going to get 10 points. And that's all it means. And so, again, I'm a huge fan of theme in games. This is one where I think that unique challenge of learning this game and playing it and trying to get really, really good and efficient and clean with it is fun. It kind of helps overlook some of that just really lacking theme. But at some point, you're sitting there afterwards going, what do? we just moved stuff around this board like crazy and our brains hurt. But did we really invent anything? Do you really feel that you've done that? So anyways, that was Inventions. I don't know if I have a little bit of buyer's remorse on this one, but it is still just a brilliant game. One that, like I said last time, I feel like if I can get good at it, I can probably get a lot better just at gaming in general. All right, enough of that. Moving on. Over the weekend, we had a nice quiet weekend. And the first thing I sat down with my family to play is Dicey Devices. Now, I do not know the publisher on this. I don't know if it is self-published. I'd have to even look that up. The designer is Daniel Kim, and the illustration is by Adine Milo. It says 1 to 4 players, 45 to 90 minutes, ages 14 and up. Now, I'm trying to think of where to start with this one, because it's a really weird game, and it's not weird in its mechanisms. The game is really straightforward. You are sort of these evil scientists, and here's how I'm going to explain this, because I have put some thought into this. In this game, you've got a player board, which is your laboratory. You have a character. You have a little weapon board with a death ray, chunky little wooden meeple that's not activated yet. You're going to have a bunch of cubes that simply represent robots. I'm hoping they're going to do, maybe a stretch goal to actually have some little robot meeples in the game, because it would absolutely need it. But you're going to be putting these robot meeples out onto a central board called the scrapyard. It's kind of a 6-sided roundish board, and you're going to be putting out these cards. You're going to be just drawing them from a deck and putting these cards in each of these slots. You're going to be sending robots out to that scrapyard to basically kind of fight over those cards. And when those regions of that board get triggered, whoever has the majority of robots there can either take the card that's there, paying for it in scrap, the only real resource of the game, or they can just gain a scrap and let the second leading player in that region possibly take that card. As these cards come into your lab, they're going to give you the ability to trigger some bonus actions or abilities on that card. And of course, there are some one-time use. There are some, frequent use. There are some cards that basically they come to your board, they sort of activate, and then they get trashed. Maybe they give you a very special one-time use, etc. But also those cards have colors on them. Some of them do. Most of them do. You've got 5 different colors in the game: red, yellow, blue, green, and a pink. And as you get combinations of those card colors in your tableau, they start to charge your super weapon. So for example, if you have 3 of a color, that gives you 1 charge of your super weapon. If you have 4 of a color, that gives you another charge of your super weapon. And yes, they do stack. So if I have 4 blues, then I have a set of 3 and a set of 4. You can possibly lose cards, although I did not really see any way to lose the colored cards. And so while the game seems to mention that can happen, I haven't seen a way to make that happen. You can also have sets of unique colors. So if you have 4 different colors or 5 different colors, and again, you can have a set of all 5 colors, which gives you a set of 4 and a set of 5. So that would give you 2 charges to your super weapon. You then get to fire that super weapon, and you get to fire it for every set that you have, but the number of sets you have determines the strength of each shot. So if you only have 1 shot, you roll a single die. Your target rolls a single die. Whoever has the highest value wins. And if you are the shooter and you win, then you possibly incapacitate your opponent. If you tie, you re-roll. And if you have a lower value, just nothing happens. But if you have 2 shots, 2 sets of cards, then you would roll 2 dice and pick the higher value. Your opponent only rolls 1 die. And if you have 3 shots or more, then you get a nuclear option. You roll a custom 10-sided die with numbers 0 through, I believe, 6. But then there is a nuclear spot on that die. And if you manage to roll that spot, you deal 2 unblockable hits to one of your opponents, and that basically will most likely incapacitate them. And real quick, there's a way that you can have shields to weather a hit, but if you get hit with that nuclear option, you're most likely going to get incapacitated. All that makes sense. The whole idea of this is to be the last scientist standing. When you knock out a opponent, they're not out of the game. There is no player elimination. They have to use their next turn trying to revive themselves. You have Igor, your little assistant, who can you can either roll doubles with 2 dice to revive yourself or spend 6 scrap to revive yourself. But with this kind of theming that you have all these robots, almost reminds me of Gru and the Minions. In that, you've got these robots that are kind of working for you. Even though you're incapacitated, the lab still kind of runs itself, but you can't shoot the weapon. You're the only person that can actually operate the weapon. And all that makes sense. All of it's fine. Except that you play that entire sequence in reverse. Everything that I just explained to you, you play that in reverse. At the beginning of your turn, if you're incapacitated, you try to stand yourself back up. You try to get your card flipped back over. If you're not incapacitated, you can then shoot your weapon. If you were incapacitated, you can't shoot your weapon even if you do get revived. Then you run your lab. You run your lab by rolling 2 dice, and there's this idea that, okay, all these spots are arranged in front of you from 1 to 12. You're going to put a die onto the space of its value. You're then going to trigger any card in that slot and any card to the left of it. You can combine dice to play those higher values, but then, of course, you're only going to trigger that 1 row. You also have a battery token that you can use to pick 1 spot to activate whether or not you roll that die, but you have to make that choice before you roll the dice. So you might choose to activate a spot that then the dice lets you activate anyways, and you cannot activate a spot twice. After you've done all of that, you've activated these cards, you may get some resources, you get more robots, you may get more scrap, etc. Then those dice that you rolled go up and activate that scrapyard. You will pick the appropriate slices of that 6-sided scrapyard and play sort of an area control game in each of those areas. So like I said, I'm going to activate section 4. I'm not even have any robots in that section. And so whoever does, they're going to get to either buy that card or take a piece of scrap. And then the last thing that you do on your turn is deploy more robots. So I mentioned that's the first thing you're doing is sending robots out in the scrapyard to get cards. And it's actually the last thing that you do on each one of your turns. And then there's a quick little reset where you put out new cards and all that kind of stuff. So you may even be putting robots out into the scrapyard not knowing what cards are going to go there at the end of your turn. And because of that, and because the rulebook is laid out that way, the rulebook tells you the phases of the game, which is great. But it starts off right away saying, well, if you're incapacitated, well, how does that even happen? We'll get to that way later. Then you get to the fire the laser step. Okay, well, now if you get incapacitated, you can use your scrap, you can use your robots, blah, blah, blah. How do I get scrap? What, I don't even know what this stuff is. Then here's the next section. Okay, now you're going to activate your lab with all these cards. Well, hey, hang on. How do I get the cards? Well, then you're going to play this area control where you're going to use your robots to pull these cards in. Oh, okay, now I know how to get cards, but how do I get the robots out there? Well, the last thing you do is you put the robots out there. And so I had to read this rule book 3 or 4 times because you're reading instructions in a section that you just absolutely do not understand what it's telling you because the explanation comes a chapter or 2 in the future. And so I had to read it once. I'm like, I have no idea what I just read. Then I come back and I read it again. Oh, okay. Well, now I remember. It was talking about this thing here. Okay, yeah, I got that. But maybe I forgot some other section. So I got to read it again. And finally on that 3rd time, things finally started to click and I kind of understood the process. Then I had to explain it to my wife and 12-year-old daughter. And by the time I was even done with the rudimentary teach, my daughter was like, I don't even want to play this. I have no idea what the heck you're talking about. I was like, well, let's just get through a couple of rounds and it'll make sense. Except for that, then you run into all this little minutia stuff that wasn't really clearly laid out in the rulebook. So, for example, I had a card that said, replace a robot on the board with one of your robots. Well, what happens to theirs? Because you have this inactive and active robot spot spaces on your board, and I didn't know where that went to. We also had, it said, okay, when the spot gets activated and you get to take a card or some scrap, you can pull, you pull a robot back. And I thought you had to pull them all back. No, then I had to find out, oh no, it's only one of them. So then we had to put more out, kind of like sort of a little bit of a reset. And my daughter was getting really frustrated and I was getting frustrated because she was frustrated. And it was just a difficult game to get through. We did get through it. And then the only thing that I sort of realized as we were finally starting to hit our groove with it is that it is just completely swingy randomness because of the fact that you play all this in reverse. So again, I'm putting robots out into that scrapyard without even necessarily knowing what card I'm trying to go for. And then there are potentially 1 or 2 more turns. Now, it may be on my wife's turn right after me, she was on my left, that she rolls a dice that activates the section that I just put that robot in. So that might pan out just fine for me. There are some ways to re-roll dice. I'm not even going to get into that. But you don't even really know what you're working towards. And you really have no idea when any of that stuff is going to fire off. We had robots in a section of the board that never got activated. We had a card that just never got activated. No one ever got their hands on this card. Also, because you're trying to complete these sets, I kind of got myself to a point where I really wanted to get blue. I wanted to get some blue cards. There's these technologies that you can get if you have a set of a color in a row or column on your board. You can get a special upgrade, which is kind of a permanent thing. As much as we can tell, you never lose it, even if you would lose the cards. But again, we're not entirely sure because of the rule book. And, okay, I want to get blues. And then we literally never saw another blue card come out in the scrapyard. Just none of them ever showed up. And so it's kind of like, well, again, what the heck am I doing here? How am I able to control this and build the upgrades that I want to build when those cards just never show up? On the other hand, my wife, because she had a couple of early actions that let her just get robots all over that board, she had a ton of majority in these different spaces. She was constantly collecting cards. She actually got her weapon upgraded to the nuke level quite quick, except for that on the next turn, my daughter was able to take her out. She was able to incapacitate her with a laser, which was great. Luckily, she aimed at me too, and I was able to roll high enough. I think I even still had my shield left, possibly by the end of the game. And then I got to my turn. Well, there's no sense shooting my wife. It's a terrible sentence to say on YouTube. There's no sense using my laser against my wife's laboratory. Maybe that's a little bit better to say. So I went ahead and I fired at my daughter, incapacitated her, and then proceeded to start taking I'm going to activate my, wait a minute. Did I just win? She's out. I think I won, right? And again, you go to the rule book and it says, well, the winner is the last person standing. It doesn't say whether that happens immediately at the end of a player's turn. I have no idea. There is a rule in the 2-player game that if you incapacitate your opponent, they immediately get to roll dice to try and see if they can revive themselves. And if they don't, then the game ends and the other player is the winner. So all that being said, the game's okay. I think it is a nice little sort of a fun, goofy game. It kind of reminds me a little bit of like a Robot Quest Arena. In fact, even at one point, my daughter was like, well, yeah, I want to get that. I know it would let me shoot, but I don't want to shoot my mom or whatever. And I'm like, hon, this is like Robot Quest Arena. You love attacking us in those games. And once she kind of realized, oh yeah, that really disappointed the game. All right, fire away, parents, I'm coming at you. And so it's cute in that regard. It's cute in this, I'm going to fire my laser and we're having fun. That kind of stuff, playing the game. But the challenge of even getting to the point that you can play the game, I think really is misleading into just what this game actually does. It's so complicated to understand and to convey it, to sort of explain this whole process in reverse of how you're going to play this, to then just sit down and shoot lasers at each other, randomly getting upgrades, randomly chucking dice, randomly seeing how the outcomes are going to be. For that, the juice is not worth the squeeze, is how it seems to me. So anyways, I haven't had a chance to write back to them. I wanted to tell them about the rule book. Like, listen, it needs some work. The production is fantastic. I mean, they have already put some decent work into this. This thing has all these wooden components, screen printed. Everything is already there. You're probably seeing all this in these photos. I love the font on it. Like, everything just has that definite, that sort of old school comedy, or not, Cartoon Network type look to it, right? And I love the look of it. I love the theming of it. It just, I don't know, something is amiss in Dicey Devices. That was enough about that one. All right, real quick, I'll try to make this one quicker. My wife and I then played later on that afternoon another game of Rats of Wistar. I mentioned this one coming out of the retreat. I love the theming of this. The theming of this is that you are rats who did escape from the Wistar Science Laboratory, which I guess is actually a real place, although it does say in here they made very careful effort to disassociate themselves with Wistar. They said it's not at all affiliated with that institute, whatever. But anyways, you're trying to compete to see which one can be the best leader of the rat pack. You're doing that by excavating your den, your rat den, building new beds to give you more workers. You're going and chopping down wood and collecting iron to do those actions. You're also exploring this abandoned farm and the lot, and you're sort of finding little things that you can sort of do within that house. You're actually accomplishing these little missions. Those missions remove these cubes from the bottom of your board, which unlock further abilities, maybe give you some extra endgame scoring, etc. And you're also gaining these technology cards. There are basic and advanced technology cards, which are providing the symbols, which then let you go and accomplish those missions inside the house. And all of it is delightful. Another game where the production, the art, and everything in this game is just fantastic. I love the way that this plays. The thing that I'm a little perplexed by is that even when we played at the retreat, I had a ton of technologies. I had contributed to a bunch of missions inside the house. And I had done that with a relatively skeleton crew of workers. I had maybe 4 or so workers out there on the board, maybe 5, but not very many. And I had even unlocked a bonus room in my den to sort of save me the effort of trying to do more excavating. Because there's only a couple times that you can do those actions on your turn. There's this idea of this spinning action wheel, and it has 6 spots around it. And when you place a worker on one of those wedges, you get to trigger the outer action, but you're going to place the worker on a spot in the wheel, which may give you some bonus actions. But especially at the 2-player game, some of those wedges of that action wheel only has 1 action spot, which means that in that entire round of 3 actions per player, only 1 player can trigger that main action because there's only 1 worker spot on that wheel. You don't place your worker on the outside of the wheel to trigger the action. You have to place yourself inside that wheel. And so, like I said, there may only be 1 action there that you can go and do that. And so if my wife went and grabbed some wood, I just can't get any. I might be able to grab one or two from some other bonus actions or something else I can kind of pull out of my rear end, but I can't go and put a bunch of workers there and get a whole bunch of wood like she just did. And so again, you're trying to find other ways to be productive. You're okay, well, I can't do that, so let me go ahead and go work on this. Let me try and get something done. But the points that you get from excavating your rat den and building these beds is extreme. If you fully excavate your den and put all the beds in, besides having a ton of workers out there on the board that can help augment your actions, you're going to get 31 points at the end of the game. When we played this at the retreat, I missed a rule in Teach. Sorry to my friends who may see this, but we were supposed to start at 10 points because you can lose points in the game. And we only got to 34. We started at 0, we got to 34. My score was 34. I think the player who won had like 38. So for there being 31 points possible on that board means that just about every point you're going to get comes from that board. A lot of those missions out there on the board, they don't have point values. Maybe you get 1 point. The technologies that you get can be worth some points, but it's maybe 1, 2, or 3 points. So you're going to need 10 of those technologies, which are very, very expensive to get played, in order to compensate for the score that you might be getting, that someone else might be getting from their den. And that same thing happened in our recent playthrough over the weekend with my wife and I, just the two of us. In that, again, I had a bunch of technologies. I'd done a bunch of missions in the house. I love that aspect of the game. I love getting technologies that give me these symbols, maybe give me a little bit of an engine building boost. And then I love going and exploring that house and doing stuff, getting little rewards, getting extra symbols, getting little upgrades, being able to put another technology. I love some of the chain reaction in this that you can get just like in Inventions, but the theme here is so much more rich and present. And yet my wife just dug out a bunch of her den and built a bunch of beds and beat me by a good 10 points. And it's like, well, hang on a second. Like, we've both played this game. We've both done a lot of stuff. I don't feel like the point rewards are really balanced because I lost the last game. We all lost the last game through the same thing. One player managed to get a really good turn at the end and excavated a whole bunch of his den, scored a whole bunch of endgame points, and won on that. He had no technologies, or very few of them. He had really not done any missions in the house, and yet just from that player board interaction, won the game. So I don't know. I love the theme, love the presentation. I love that sort of anthropomorphized animal, theme, but I just don't know that the actions that you're doing are really balanced in this game. Not quite sure. I'm sure I'll give it another go. I think there is. Can this be played solo? Yes, it can. Maybe that's where I need to explore a little better, because the way that wheel's spinning, you just can't always predict what's going to happen, and it's kind of hard to plan ahead. Anyways, that was Rats of Wistar, the game that fell on the floor over the weekend. So we played 3 games yesterday. We started one game, realized I goofed it, quit, kind of reset, went to go out and grab some food at a food truck that we really like. And while we were there, we played another game of Seeker Chronicles. I'm just going to put this in the corner of the screen here. I mentioned this one a couple of episodes ago, and I'm not really going to get into it, but it's a 2-player only game where you're trying to sort of build out these 3 columns of cards, very much like Air, Land, and Sea, very much like Compile. And the whole idea is you're trying to have a leading value of strength on these 3 columns over your opponent, because at the end of each one of your turns, you're going to take the net value that you have over your opponent, and then you're going to move that many cards from your deck to your discard. And I talked about in that episode how, again, the rulebook was really, really bad on this because it taught everything in order, but you do things in a different order, right? It's okay. Well, you're gonna play out Seekers, and you're gonna tuck cards, and you're gonna move things from your memory. And that was the other thing, was that it used all these made up terms. It's not your deck, it's your life, and it's not your play area, it's your memory, and it's not your discard, it's your archive, and it's not tucking a card, it's linking a card, and if you're linking it from your hand or from the table, it has 2 different terms. And it was so much just made up jargon that it was impossible to follow the gameplay. And even on the cards themselves, it uses those same terms. So play a card from your memory. What is my memory? I got to go into the rule book to figure out that the memory is my play area right in front of me. Stop that. Just call it play area. It's almost the same number of letters. Forget about it, right? When we played this a few weeks ago, I took one particular set. There's like 6 decks in the game. You play 3 against 3. So I had 3 decks and my wife had 3 decks. And it told you, for your first game, pit these 3 against these 3. Okay, great. I'll take these, you take those. And we played. And I absolutely just destroyed her. I destroyed her so bad that I felt terrible about it. She was not having any fun whatsoever. I was like, let's just get through this. We're almost done. Because I cycled through my deck. This whole idea of moving your cards to your discard pile. You have to do that 3 times. When you complete it the 3rd time, you win the game. Basically, when you empty your deck 3 times, you win the game. And I ran through my deck 3 times before she had run through hers once. I had turns where I was moving 20 cards. I had turns where I was emptying my deck, shuffling, and then moving half the deck over because you get to just keep going until you've gone through your full count. And it was so lopsided that I thought, I need to try it again. This is a review copy, but let's swap. Let's just do everything the same, but let's swap. And we did. We played it over the weekend, and she destroyed me in this game. Absolutely nuked me. Now, I got through my deck a couple more times. She had a couple turns where she was waiting to play some extremely powerful cards, and she had to have a number of resources kind of laid out in her play area. And so that gave me a couple of turns to kind of get a little bit ahead, and then, boom, she just absolutely clobbered me with her next play. And so I think I got through my deck twice. And again, it was like, well, I get 5. I get 3. I had one time where I got like 15 cards. Oh man, this is amazing. Oh, I get 15 cards. And then on her next turn, she got 22. And it was like, Jesus. And we really tried looking at these decks afterwards. The one deck, it actually belongs to Stephen Hawking, because it's so supposed to be set in this kind of real world with these famous physicists and such, although again the theme is not really there. And that deck, the Stephen Hawking deck, is so powerful. It has card values that give you 6 or 7 power into your seekers. You don't even have to assign them to the right seeker, so you could play these cards anywhere you want. At least we think. Again, the rulebook's not that great, but there's so much strength in that deck. And I'm looking at my cards, and I didn't have anything higher than a 5. And again, because on the end of your turn, you're moving cards directly from your deck to your discard. And I'm literally flipping over. Okay, well, there goes a 4. There goes a 5. There's a 0. There's another 4. Well, all of my powerful cards are flying right into my discard pile. They don't get to go into my hand. I can't use the damn things. Now, my decks did give me a little bit of ability to pull some stuff out of my discard pile, my archive, and get them played, which doesn't affect me because I'm still weeding through my deck, right? Which was fine, but I just could not get through it quick enough. And it just, even my wife was sitting there, she goes, yeah, I'm gonna get another 20 cards. And even she was like, yeah, okay, yeah, I know. We just do not feel like this game is balanced. At least that one deck is not balanced. I really don't know that I'm compelled to try and play this thing again and now rearrange the decks and maybe take that Stephen Hawking deck and try and find 2 weaker decks and see if I can still win. I don't know. We just have not enjoyed this because you're either losing so badly that you're just pissed, or you're winning it so well that you don't feel fair. Anyways, that is Seeker Chronicles. The other game that we played, this was the first one that we played, and then the last one that we played. We came back after that excursion and played this again, is Eminent Domain. This is from Tasty Minstrel Games, who of course is now out of business. I don't actually remember when this game came out. I want to say that it is this one says copyright 2011. So it's a fairly older game. And listen, this is a deck builder set in space. So you can anticipate my excitement for this one already. I've had this one for a while. I did talk about playing it in the 2024 Cabin Con, which was one of the first episodes. Actually, it was the only episode that I've ever done here on the Ratchet where I had my friends Katie and Greg from the Meeple Society in that video. I can't remember which episode it was. I think it was back in like the teens or 20s. But this was a game that we played. We played this the base game. Now, this time, my wife and I played this. We brought out all the expansions. So I had Escalation. I believe it is, what's the other one? Not Excursion. I can't remember what the second one's called. And then there is Oblivion. And each of those expansions sort of explores one of the other aspects of this game. So real quick, deck building game set in space. It is very similar to that of Race for the Galaxy or New Frontiers in that you are trying to conquer planets. You're trying to gain new technologies, and you're also just trying to collect these influence points, which, just like New Frontiers and Race for the Galaxy, they're limited in their count. So if you run out of a deck of cards, that triggers the end game, or if you run out of the influence tokens, that triggers the end game, especially for the 2-player game specifically. What's kind of interesting with this one is that when you think about a lot of modern deck builders, and Rocketman is one that comes to mind, where you've got a bunch of different cards in your hand, and every card does something a little different. Every card has a unique ability. Maybe you're gaining more powerful cards. They may be relatively simple cards that just give you a good effect. Maybe you're trying to increase your hand size, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Most of the cards in this game are exactly the same. There are 6 different types of cards. I'm not going to remember them all, but there are politics, survey, warfare, research. Starting to get a little fuzzy. You got your trade and your production. And then there is another one that is colonization. Ha! I remembered. You're going to start with a certain number of each of those cards. All those cards are exactly the same. Every survey card is the same. Every trade and production combo card is the same. And so you're going to start off with a certain number of those cards, and on your turn, you simply get to take one action, which could be playing one of those cards for its action effect, but you may also have some abilities that are going to give you actions, either some tiles at the start of the game or some technologies and such that you gain throughout the game. So because we played with all the expansions of this, we had a military action, so we could turn a bunch of little fighters into a cruiser. We had a political action where you could just gain a little political token from a bag. And we had a mining action where you could mine an asteroid, which is one of the upgrades from one of the expansions. And so all that stuff could come to you throughout the game. Then you get to do a role action, R-O-L-E. And that is going to be to play as many cards as you want of the same type. So I can play a whole bunch of research cards. I can play a whole bunch of production and trade cards. You then get to take one more of those cards from the center board. If there is any left, you add it to the ones that you've played, and you get to take an action based on that card. So for example, the research card says you can basically buy a technology equal to the cost of how many of those research cards you've played. And through the expansion especially, there are many ways to get to augment those. Some of those political little tokens that you drew from the bag, they may let you augment it. You may have planets or other technologies out which let you augment it. You may even have technology cards in your hand that are not research cards, but they have that symbol on it. They have the same tag, and you can play it to further augment that action to be able to buy the tech that you want. The techs usually require you to have one or more different types of planets present, and so your first order of business using this game is to start getting some planets settled. And you can do that just like in Race for the Galaxy. You can colonize them, you can build a bunch of colonies on them and eventually settle that planet, or you can send in a big army and attack that planet and take it over via military force. In the last expansion, Oblivion, you have a way to annex a planet basically using political influence, and again, there's a couple different ways that you can do that. And that's more or less the game. Now, when we played it the first time, I completely forgot how the technology cards worked. And so we were taking the tech cards and we would buy them. We were just putting them face up in front of us. And that's our technology display. Towards the end of the game, I was reading some text on a card that says, well, if you have the card in your hand, you can discard it. I was like, well, hang on a second. How do technology cards go into your hand? And when I checked the rules, I realized that no, your tech cards go into your hand. That is part of your deck. There are some technologies which have a permanent effect. Those never go into your hand. They do immediately go out and play in front of you. And they're actually two-sided, and so you can kind of pick which side of that technology you want to have present for the rest of your game. And so I was like, oh, we goofed this so badly because I was using my technologies way more often than I was supposed to be. I had more than my wife, so I was becoming very, very powerful in a way that wasn't fair. We decided to pack up, sort of reset, and then we came back and we played it again yesterday evening with the right rules, and we got through it. I had a lot of fun with this. Unfortunately, it's a very, very hard game to come by. You can get the base game pretty easily. I think the 2 expansions, the exoplanets or something, and then the escalation, those are fairly easy to come by, but the Oblivion expansion took me forever to find a copy of. You're probably better off trying to find someone who has the entire game and is willing to sell it. There's also a ton of promos and just little expansions that I don't think I'll ever be able to find. But I enjoy this. It's a very basic deck builder in the fact that you're not really adding a lot of wild cards to your hand. It just is this idea that, okay, I want to settle this planet and I need colonies to do it. It needs 4. I start the game with only 2. So every time I take that roll, I'm going to add another, card to my hand and to my deck. And eventually I'm going to have enough that I can make that settlement action. Later on, I might have a whole bunch of those in my hand. I can take that roll again and tuck all of them under that card, and now I'm ready to settle that planet immediately on my next turn. But the more and more and more you do that, the more you're draining the cards from that deck, and you're pushing the game towards the end, and maybe there's a lot more things you want to do. And so I felt like the deck building aspect is very different than a lot of other deck builders in that it's not, okay, I have 5 money, what can I buy? You're not doing that almost at all. And that whole sort of conflict between, well, if I go ahead and get this progressed, that'll be great for me, but then I'm possibly triggering the end of the game too soon. Maybe I'm going to hold off on settling that planet, try and get me some more technology. Maybe I'm going to try and find more clever ways to get a planet colonized without using it as my role so I don't further diminish that deck. We also found when we were playing it the first time, you can put resources out on planets. And again, very much like Race for the Galaxy, the resources don't really do anything, but you can later trade them in to get points. And we just really weren't doing that in our first playthrough. In my second playthrough, I got a technology out, which actually let me, the trade and production actions are on the same cards. You can either produce resources or trade them in for points with that same card, but you can only do that one thing. I got a technology that basically said, if my opponent does something, I can follow it, but I can flip the roll. And that's something I completely left out from this teach, is that like Race for the Galaxy and a lot of these other games, when your opponent triggers an action, okay, I'm going to do the research roll, you can then copy them, but you just don't get to take a card. So if I had some research cards, and maybe that wasn't really something I was looking to do in my turn, oh, well, hey, you're doing it, so I'm going to go ahead and copy. I can still do a research as long as I have enough tags, and I can bolster it with other technologies, other abilities, other political tokens, etc. And it makes the game even more clever because you're going, well, I want to do something, but I really hope you don't want to do it too. Although if your opponent doesn't want to or can't copy your action, they just get to draw another card from their deck, which could also be quite useful. And so anyways, like I said, very, very different style of deck builder I felt. It doesn't follow the standard tropes. For being an older game, it's surprising to see something that I really can't think of other games that do this the same way. Now, again, it's using a lot of mechanisms from Race for the Galaxy, New Frontiers, etc. But with that deck building aspect, and I don't know, I just really had a lot of fun with this. I also really liked the fact that none of the expansions were really that difficult to learn. And I really had to laugh because as I was reading every book, it's like, oh, don't play with this expansion mixed with that expansion until you've played each one independently multiple times. And don't even think about putting all these expansions together until you have a lot of experience with the game. I was like, look, if I wait to do that, we'll never, ever get it played. So we're just going to throw caution on the wind and chuck it all in and see what happens. And it really was not that difficult to get our heads around. It wasn't hard to teach this with my wife. And while I definitely had a little bit of I've had this upside down the entire time. Ha! Oh, that's embarrassing. Maybe I'll edit that and flip the image over in it. No, I probably won't. But anyways, that sucks. What was I saying? Despite this sort of being my favorite genre and my favorite style of play, I did win this game, but not by much. It was not a vicious blowout. My wife did pretty well with this. And as she put it, she goes, it wasn't like, oh my God, the game was amazing. I can't wait to play it again, but it was certainly fine. I really liked it. It is too bad that most deck builders really can't play a single player very well. And this one is no exception. Anyways, that is Eminent Domain, the right side up. All right, that is it for episode number 76. Thanks for watching. Let me go ahead and throw a question of the week at you for next week. This one is actually inspired by a conversation I had earlier this week. I mentioned a couple episodes that I met someone that is actually one of the general managers of local breweries that we go to, and he's a big gamer, but his gaming tastes are just completely different from mine. And he asked me an interesting question. We were hanging out at the brewery middle of last week, and he said, well, hey, what's a gaming mechanism that you really, really like? And I said, oh, deck building. He goes, no. And he says, I mean like a specific thing that a game let you do, like maybe a certain way that a card gets played, or a certain thing that, oh, maybe you can trade things in a unique way that you thought, oh, that's really interesting. And I didn't have an answer. And I'm wondering what yours might be. So I'm going to change it up here just a little bit and say what one specific rule or mechanism from a recent playthrough has stood out to you. Now, he meant something you really, really liked. What I came back with was something that I actually really don't like in a game, a very specific way that a game can sort of play for you. And so it doesn't have to be something that you really enjoyed, although that would be great, of course. But if there's something that, and again, this is a specific thing, not just deck building, not just worker placement, not just rolling dice, but, well, I really liked that this game did this and triggered this in a unique way, and it was really, really interesting. So that's what I would love to hear about in episode number 77. That is it for episode 76. Thanks for watching. As always, be sure to get in your questions of the week. Looking forward to this conversation, and I will chat with you folks again soon. Cheers.